one thing you need to understand about leadership, not management, about leadership, is that there is a first principle belief that it is not about you. Leadership is not about you. It is about those you serve and their ability to achieve the mission. If you focus on the mission and the people that you serve and making sure they're successful, then you as a leader will be successful. Management can be about you because we're just managing businesses, processes, and that, there's a whole thread there.
Dusty, welcome to the One Away Show.
Brian, it is so good to be here. Thank you for having me, man.
It's always a pleasure speaking with you. I feel like every time we talk, I walk away and I'm like, that is a solid human being that I should try and emulate more. So glad we got you here to dive into who you are. So thank you for making time.
You're quite welcome. And the feeling is very much mutual. Anytime I walk away from a conversation with you, I'm a little bit smarter, a little bit sharper, and I'm thinking. And so that's a measure of success for me.
Great. I don't know. I'm here to make people. I've heard that I make a lot of people sharper, but I'll take it. I'm glad that impact has been felt by you, Dusty. So let's dive in. This is called the One Away Show, and we're here to talk about trajectory changing moments. So, what is your one away moment that you want to share with us today?
I was thinking about that in preparation for this, and at first I went with one that I think was surface. I think it's incredible. I've had a lifelong series of inflection points and one away moments, I believe. But if I had to be really brutally honest, it would be the age of 11 where I did not go to a primary school from 5th grade forward. I was homeschooled, and that became what 11-year-old isn't thrilled by the idea of their parents coming to them and saying, "Hey, would you like to not go to school anymore?" Like, "Yes, please, sign me up." And they did it for the right reasons. We lived in a very rural part of Georgia. But it was a one-away moment. It became the inflection point for me because it allowed me to fuel native curiosity by going to the library and studying what other people had done, specifically history. I'm a history nut. I'm a biography nut, military history, just love to learn. And so when I look back in life and I kind of walk backwards through the inflection points I've had, I don't think I would have the life I have, the blessings I have, or have had the opportunity to serve the people I had if I had not been taken out of a school and given this wonderful opportunity that actually became a seed for a giant chip on my shoulder and opened up a world of curiosity. So that's my kind of vulnerable first deeper moment.
So it sounds like what I'm hearing is you were pretty much thrown into a library, whether you liked it or not, and it was go uncover the world, and you had to uncover the world.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
And it was. I remember seeing my curriculum reports my mom had to send in, and I remember looking at them and going, "We didn't do any of that. I just went to the library. There's math and science," and I'm going, I guess I better do some of that stuff. So it set up some challenges later in life, but I wouldn't change it for the world.
So let me ask you, you talked about how it opened up your world. When you look back to that age, you said history was a big area of focus, but what, that curiosity, like a library can take you in many places. Some people are drawn to different parts of the library. Some people open up different books and spend different lengths of times in those books. Like, where was your curiosity being driven towards? It sounds like history, but I'd love for you to expand on that. And then why do you think, based on those areas of interest, you spent so much time, learning about them?
Yeah, so I was driven towards, I had this fascination with military history, specifically World War II. We didn't have a TV when I was growing up. So the books became the place where I got to learn and explore and experience worlds and people. And I remember reading, biographies of Eisenhower at like 11, 12 years old and biographies on, Rommel and Marshall and like all these different leaders from those eras. I wasn't reading them because I was some guy that knew I wanted to have a professional career. I was just like fascinated with the stories of how these people, evolved and learned, coming out of World War I and then in World War II. And, and then I studied and read about Vietnam and Korea and the Civil War. And So there was definitely a bias there, but I was fascinated with the story and I was fascinated with digging in. Like I didn't go read, a lot of fiction. Like if I were I just didn't, other than Lord of the Rings and, anything from C.S. Lewis. Like I was reading histories and biographies, and it was because I was fascinated with the people. And I was fascinated with this idea of normal, ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And it was just such a different world. It was such a different era. There's so many things we take for granted now that they didn't have. And they learned, honestly, I think I felt some resonance because you read a book about Lincoln and how he's reading with a candle in a one-room cabin. And I'm in a library going, oh, I'm reading. I'm not weird. And maybe I've never even thought about it until you just asked that question. I was reading about people who were learning maybe the same way I was, and I didn't feel weird because I felt pretty weird for a long time in my life because I didn't go to, primary school education.
Super interesting. And so the World War II military history, tell me more. So military history during that time period, that impacted millions of people. You were stretching back in time, many years, decades. And what was it about World War II? What was it about military history that was I should spend some time here. I should really learn about this. I should devour this content. And I'm just curious why that was the area of time that you kind of focused in on.
Yeah, I think at the moment I was just curious, and it was an adventure. And it was this adventure story. I wasn't wise enough to know that this was a story of real life and death and tragedy and trauma. But I can remember reading and rereading books about the Battle of Midway and how I was just fascinated with how this idea that there were code hackers that figured this out, and how the 4 Japanese carriers, of which I still know the names, were sunk by these amazing men who were really putting it all on the line. And so I think it was first a series. It was this thirst for adventure. I think second, it was this idea of wanting to understand, maybe my grandparents or my granddad who had served in World War II, and some of the stories he had told, and so on, his deeper, more familiarity with that. And, that era of, because I was born in the 70s, grew up in the 80s, they were 40 years removed from having done these things. So we're talking people who were in their 60s or 70s were the people that lived that, and they were people that were in my life. And so somehow I think I got a little bit of identity and understanding, and that was what fascinated me. Now, I read Hardy Boys and I read all the other stuff too, but those were the stories. I probably still have my Battle of Midway book, or Baba Black Sheep about, Pappy Boyington or whatever. And I was just fascinated with the stories, and specifically how people put it all on the line for something that mattered, that was bigger than them.
So let's expand on that a little bit. So I really, probably similar to you, appreciate the people who jump and they don't know if they're going to land safely. And there's a lot of leadership. There's a lot of leadership lessons that are drawn from our military history. And you see a lot of, in business, the business world of today, drawing on military leaders for lessons, people like Jocko Willink, and I'm forgetting the other big name in the space for it'll come to me. But my question to you is, Dusty, right now, and we'll get to it more, you are working with leaders, you are developing leaders, shaping leaders, you're going deep in a very applied methodology from our conversations. But what are you drawing into your work when you're working with leaders that also applies from what you learned at the military level and what you've learned just from military lessons, growing up?
Well, I think the one-away story I was thinking about when we first was preparing was, I had the wonderful privilege of being 21 years old and getting tucked under the wing of a retired full bird colonel. And this was a person, I was in a call center environment. I was a call center rep on the phone, in college. And I knew I wanted to do more. I was hungry, but I was hungry because I wanted to make more money, blah, blah, blah. And I applied for a leadership role, supervisor role, didn't get it. But Greg was amazing. He pulled me aside and said, someone is more qualified, and you will get your time and you will get your opportunity. You've got a tremendous, ceiling and a career ahead of you. Be patient, and I'll work with you. And he did. So at 21 years old, to directly answer your question, I got tucked under the wing of someone who was probably the first mentor I had in a professional context, who poured into me, not because he had to, but because he cared. And it was what he did in the military. He was the caretaker and steward of young officers in their careers. And he taught me what I would say is the most seminal leadership lesson that I've ever learned. And I can vividly remember the moment that he shared this with me, which is, Dusty, the one thing you need to understand about leadership, not management, about leadership, is that there is a first principle belief that it is not about you. Leadership is not about you. It is about those you serve and their ability to achieve the mission. If you focus on the mission and the people that you serve and making sure they're successful, then you as a leader will be successful. Management can be about you, because we're just managing businesses, processes, and there's a whole thread there. But that lesson at 21 allowed me to be 22 years old running a call center with 250 agents. It allowed me to be 23 years old taking a new job, having to walk through the trauma of telling Greg that I was going to resign. That's a whole nother story. And then starting up a new call center in a new town with 350 people that I got to hire. And I had to build the whole leadership team. Like, I was no way qualified for that. But that principle approach, and it informs the work I do today, that leadership is not about you. It's about the mission and the people that you serve to ensure they can achieve the mission. And it's hard. It's not a soft thing, but that has flavored and informed every bit of my work. And it is the reason I'm so passionate about what I do.
I really resonated with what you were talking about, what leadership is versus, management and like the business process, and how it isn't about you. And you were talking about, you said Greg, correct?
Correct.
Greg. You said he saw something in you and he took you aside and helped develop you to go on and do things that you were not prepared to do at a later date. I guess two questions. What do you think Greg saw in you to say, hey, I'm going to invest my time in this guy and develop him into what I can see for him, where maybe he is now versus where he can be? And then part of being mentored is trusting someone enough to come into your life and guide you. And what do you think it was about you that said, or him that said, I'm going to let this guy influence how I show up in the world?
Yeah, I will love that. I would say first thing is Greg was a developer of people. He was a professional talent scout. He ran different schools in the Army and he did different things. And so when I resigned, I'll tell the story because I think it puts a very fine point on this. I agonized over this resignation letter. I'd worked for him for a couple of years at this point. And I had this opportunity I couldn't turn down. It was truly one of those, I can't turn this moment down because I'm being asked at 23 to go do this thing that I'm not qualified to do, but I get to start a culture. I get to, hire leaders. I get to do all this stuff. And so I took him this letter and I slid it across his desk. And I can remember he pulled his little reading glasses down and said, well, Dusty, I'm disappointed deeply, but I'm not surprised. I had hoped that we would have enough opportunities fast enough to keep up with your ambition and your capabilities, but that didn't happen, and you will be successful, and I wish you the best. But I want you to know this, because I could probably just like, because I was afraid I was going to get butt chewing or whatever. And he looked at me and said, the single greatest benefit I got out of being a military leader is that when young officers were rotated under me, I knew that I was not there to hold on to them. I was there to ensure they were successful in the mission now and be ready for their next one. So the part of having great leaders is preparing them for their next role and knowing that it will not always be serving you. And it went back to that leadership's not about you thing. It wasn't about him holding on to talent. So I think he saw in me, like that was who he was. What he saw in me, probably, if I'm it's hard for me to say that, but like curious, humble, just anxious, like I wanted to learn, like just native, absolute curiosity. And the way you ask that question makes me think, my dad was a dairy farmer, and then he was a University of Georgia extension agent. So from a very young age, I was all about, good dogs, man. I was all about around and understanding farming. And a farmer's work ethic is different. It is, and the way Dad explained this to me, and it's probably one of those great life lessons. I probably haven't shared the story enough, but it's, Dusty, the thing you have to understand is the cows have to be milked 7 days a week, every day of the year. There are no days off. The work must be done, and you have to do the work. And if you don't take care of them, they won't give milk. They'll get sick. They won't be able to provide for your family. And so this farmer's work ethic or farmer's mentality paired with just an insatiable curiosity, I'm guessing that's what Greg saw and said, here's someone that's hungry, humble, because I had a huge chip on my shoulder because I thought it was kind of dumb. That's a whole nother story. And he gave me opportunities.
I've been thinking about that question more and more because over the last 2 or 3 years, I've had some extraordinary people step into my own life. And I think sometimes and not just for a minute, an hour, like true commitments to building better futures and in an active role. And sometimes I look at that and I'm like, well, why me? And I look, and then the more I get to know them, and it's not like what makes me different. It's just, it's like, what is it? What are the qualities that they have that I start thinking about? Then to your point, it's like, oh, maybe you have those qualities too. You're just maybe not as far along on the journey. And I think to what you're saying is people, when people see something in others and they can harness it and develop that and pay that forward, it's they do that. And it sounds like for you, it wasn't just about getting you to a certain place of development. It was getting you to a place of development so that you could be ready for, like you said, the mission ahead that maybe wasn't at that current place. And I think that's very beautiful.
It's one of those things. I've journaled about it. I've thought back about it. I remember the very first time Greg invited me, once I was promoted into a leadership role, to the book club that he held. And it was at 0:30 in the morning, because there was about half the leadership team were retired officers or senior enlisted. And so 0:30 was 0:30. It was 6:00 in the morning, first cup of coffee, always black coffee. And I remember showing up and we were doing the book Leadership by the Book. And we sat down and we just, he said, hey, the pre-read is this. And then we discussed. And I just remember at this table with people who have 20, 30-year careers. And I got to, here's what I'm thinking. And I wasn't shy, but I remember being blown away that someone said, that's a really good perspective. I've never thought about it that way before. And I went, whoa, I actually might be able to be at this table. I did not feel like I belonged to the table. I've wrestled with that most of my life. I think many leaders do. It's like that imposter syndrome, and it's a real thing. But I remember going, wow, this guy over here, who's a retired sergeant major, just said, that was interesting. I've never thought about it that way. Tell me more. And I went, wow, okay. Don't say anything stupid. Don't say anything stupid. I'm pretty sure I did, but that's just the way he led.
I also agree with you that I think a lot of people who get into leadership positions or lead and do great things, not always, but can build from a place of lack or not feeling adequate enough. And it's like that over indexing on things that just someone who feels pretty content maybe want to do that helps someone stand out. And I want to come back to what you said. You said growing up, you didn't maybe feel smart because of your school structure growing up. You maybe skipped over certain things that maybe you saw come back later. What were some of the, maybe what you would call gaps and weaknesses, inefficiencies of Dusty that actually built strengths in a different way? How would you answer that question now?
Yeah, I would answer that question now through this lens of, because I was so autodidactic, I read to learn and satisfy my curiosity. I wasn't reading any math textbooks. Like there was no point where I went into the library and went, algebra, that looks fun. Let me go do that. And so when I progressed through my education, and even when I had an opportunity to go to regular high school, I chose not to. I had to get a GED. So that was when you finish, as a homeschool, or back in the 80s, that was what you did. You got a GED. It may or may not be that way now. And that had a stigma, right? That was for the high school dropout, the person who couldn't get through high school. And then I took the SAT, and the SAT crushed it on verbal. Like verbal was fine. Like that was like 80% of my score, my SAT score, maybe 90, was verbal. Math, I tanked it. I got the basic stuff, but I'm pretty sure I didn't pass any of the 8th grade, 9th grade mathematics. And so I thought my brain just didn't work that way. And I didn't know that I just hadn't been trained. I just hadn't been given the knowledge by someone who knew how to teach that stuff. And so that created this huge chip on my shoulder. I felt like I was behind. And it's so funny now, Brian, because math is actually, the numbers, and like that's almost intuitive. It's actually a gift. But then I thought it was this massive weakness. I just didn't know how. I didn't have the actual skill or education. And when I applied to college, the admissions counselor looked at my GED, and he, I had a meeting with him, and he looked at my SAT scores. And I remember him, I remember this vividly. He pulled his glasses down, just maybe now I hear this, think about it. It's very similar to Greg, and said, son, not everybody's cut out for college. Maybe you should consider a trade school, or you should consider something working with your hands. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? There is so much. In fact, I love doing some of those things now because there's real pride in building and creating. But it was a huge chip on my shoulder. And I remember going back to him a few years later and sliding my diploma across my desk, magna cum laude, and going, thank you for the motivation. Because once I got there, I realized I just didn't have the foundation. I just didn't know the principles. And so that weakness, that chip on my shoulder, was always a feeling of inadequacy. And for many, many years, it fueled me. And I think that the effect of that, and only through many years of thinking and studying and paying attention to a lot of things, it really has helped me understand that as leaders, the things that we do and do well are what gets us to the next opportunity, but they aren't the things that make us successful at that next opportunity. It's like getting to the inflection point is the first goal. The second goal, the second level of thinking, is what do you have to do to actually be good at that? And I think that's part of the fuel for the imposter syndrome or other things. And as we record this, just earlier today, I was talking with someone. She's an incredible leader, growing a company, just massive opportunities as CEO. And she's like feeling like crazy, like, and I'm telling her some things, and she goes, I said, at the end of our call, so what's been most valuable or useful for you? And she goes, that I'm not alone and this is normal. Yes, you've done amazing things your entire career. That's what's gotten you into this seat. To get to the next one, to be comfortable in the seat, you got to keep growing. And I think that, hindsight, that lack of mathematics and all those things, it was a foundational miss. And I can only say now that I wouldn't trade it for anything, because it fueled a lot.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I'll just build on, and by the way, we have similar stories in many ways, but one of the things that I'll build on is you're very strong empathetically, socially, the ability to connect the dots. Like, you don't need 4 times 4 times divided by 8 to do that. Like, you need to get people. And leaders get people and grow people. And if you have the business sense behind it, you can be even more effective because now you have more tools in your tool belt. But I think let's say you were just engineer and you see engineer your whole life, like, they don't have, not all engineers. I mean, I really love engineers, but they don't have the dusty tool belt often. And if they do, they're pretty rare. So, I think to your point, it's probably made you more well-rounded. I have one question for you, and then I want to dive into a few of the things we were talking about pre-call. We've been talking about growing and developing leaders, people who grew you, but you let people grow you and let people into your world. But now you're working, Dusty, I know, through group dynamics with other leaders together, through individual ways of working with people. You're working with people and growing themselves, and you're working with leaders to grow the people around them. Sounds like this woman. What does it take or require of someone like you in your shoes or a CEO's shoes to look at themselves or look beyond to their team to, one, notice how to actually grow somebody, and then put in the infrastructure or the opportunity to then say, take that vision that they have for that person and bring that to life? Because one, there's an awareness, but two, there's a lot more. So how would you answer that question when you've done that across what seems like thousands of people through the course of your life?
Yeah, it's interesting. I like the way you frame that question. And the first principle belief I have is that if you want to lead another human being, you have to lead yourself first. And so that means you must have a clarity of understanding about what's important and what's not. And it's that clarity aspect that's so important. And literally for 25 years, and I don't remember who gave this gift to me, it was this idea of what's our goal. When we start a conversation, when I'm starting a coaching call, when I'm looking at a leader, it's like, well, first off, what is it that we're trying to achieve here? What's our goal? What is this objective we're thinking about? So when I work with a leader, and I've always done this, it's like first going back to what is it we're trying to achieve? What am I trying to achieve with this person? What is it they're trying to achieve? And if there's a Venn diagram there and there's a tremendous overlap, then in order for me to achieve what I want to achieve as a company or an organization, I need to help them be successful. But many times they don't have that clarity. They don't understand what is it they're trying to achieve. So literally the conversation can be, hey, Brian, walk me through what great looks like when you make this decision or when you navigate this challenge or whatever that is. Help me understand what it is that you want to achieve. How do you want to feel? How will you know if you've been successful? And so me reframing the conversations to put it on them and for them, very specifically, opens up a world of opportunities. And it lets me do what I think that I do best. And I had one of my clients yesterday. She's a CEO of a couple $100 million construction company. And she told me, she said, Dusty, what you do is you ask questions differently than I've ever been asked. And you don't tell me ever what to do. And I can, very honestly say, very rarely will I tell someone what to do. What I try to do is expose through questions the information or insights they need so that they can own the outcome of the decision they're going to make. And I think that that's the real leadership flip there. And so what I do is try to be the black light that exposes the dots on the page they just can't see because they don't have that lens. And, I think that as I think about that, that comes from maybe 15 or 17 years ago. I was watching Jim Collins give a speech, and Jim was talking about how he was a young Stanford business grad, consultant, too big for his britches and super smart. And he got an opportunity to work for Peter Drucker and did this project, did it for 3 weeks or something. And it's Jim's story, not mine, so I'm going to paraphrase it. But what I loved about this story is Jim, he goes to Peter at the end of this session, and he's expecting this giant attaboy, pat on the back, you're so smart, good job. I mean, Peter Drucker is the father of modern management. He's written 70 or 80 books and all this stuff. And he did it in Peter's accent. I'm not going to try that, but he said, Peter looked at him and said, Jim, I think you will find that you can create much more influence and impact if you would spend more time being interested and less time being interesting. And that was one of those, like, I honestly felt like I'd been hit between the eyes with a baseball bat. It's like, whoa, I think I spend way too much time being interesting and way too little time being interested and asking questions. And because Jim then put a bow on the end of this thing where he said, what he told me was, you need to change your questions to statement ratios. And like, that was the big shift. Like, and I literally kept a scorecard for probably 2 or 3 months. What was my question versus statement ratio today? And because I realized that I had a lot of statements. And so to kind of a roundabout way answer your question is, I'm going into a conversation wanting to understand the goal, how I can help that person articulate and get to that goal. And I wanted to do it through better questions that help them that aren't about me.
Yeah, it's interesting. So one, I love that. If we had time, I can tell you what I did at University of Georgia as an experiment one time to start learning how to ask questions. But anyways, this is about you. So offline.
I'm going to count on hearing that story one day, though.
It's a good story. So anyways, so 2 schools of thought. One, I couldn't agree more. It's people don't necessarily want to be told what to do. They want to feel like they arrived there themselves, but they're okay being influenced in that direction. And what I'm hearing from you is you because of the trenches you've walked through, might have foresight before the other person does of like maybe the direction they should go. But you're going to design or architect your questions in a way that leads them to that, to help them realize what you realize without saying, just do this, because they have the time to process it. Is that fair?
That is fair, with the one very strong caveat is that I'm not asking the questions as a trap. I'm asking the questions and listening to their answer and then changing the next question or the next thing based on information I didn't have. I always told the teams I led, this is what I believe based on what I know, but I reserve the right to change my mind on the presentation of information I don't yet have. Go. And so that's what I would tell teams. Hey, I'll tell you what I think, but I reserve the right to change my mind. So I will sometimes have foresight about something, or sometimes have a direction I think might be right. And so I'm going to do and ask questions. I'm very much a believer in the Socratic method and the scientific method. So I'm going to throw a question out that's a hypothesis to see what answer I get, and then I can do an evaluation, a review, and change the next question. So I very much pay attention to the answers. And there have been a lot of times where I was not right, and I go, oh, I just figured something out. That changes my next question. I love to play chess. So it's like trying to think 3 moves ahead or 4 moves ahead, but you're playing against the opponent's next move, because sometimes they just do things you're not ready for, and you go, oh, I need to actually adjust my strategy here.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like what you said about changing the question or reserving the right to be wrong. I think it's a very fluid way of going about it, and responding to what they give you. The second, like the counterintuitive or the counter logic to that is your friend who's a CEO running this, sounds like, large 8-figure company, and questioning if she is capable, even though everything in your track record says you are capable. One thing that I've come to appreciate or agree with is sometimes leaders are just so busy. They have so much going on. Part of the value is just being told what to do. And the reason I say that, I remember a mentor said to me once, he goes, leaders want to be led as well because they're so busy directing everyone else. So what's your philosophy on questions and letting people arrive at what they need to do versus, hey, like, this is the logic behind this, go do it? And I'm just curious how you'd say that given your line of work right now.
Yeah, so I like the way you frame that. And so what I would do is, in a live situation, I'm working with you on this, I would, instead of telling them what to do, I'm a member of YPO, and as you know, and one of the most fundamental values of being a member of YPO is the practice of forum. And in forum, we never give advice. We do experience share, and we share how something manifested or affected us. And so I will often do, hey, I've been in a similar situation. Here is the experience that I had. Here's how it worked for me. Here's the decision I made. It may not be a direct translation for you, but what does that bring to you? And if that opens up a thread where you want me to tell you advice, I will, but I want you to invite me into that conversation based on something that I've said, not look for the prescription. Because there are times, you are 100% right. There are times that I have leadership teams when I'm working with the whole team, or I'll have the CEO go, damn it, Dusty, just tell me what I should do. Great. Here's in my experience, here's what I've seen work exceedingly well. Here's what I've seen create a lot of issues. This is a challenge. But I don't have the context you have. I don't know the business as well as you know the business. What does that unlock for you when you hear that experience? Now, based on what I know and believe, this is how I might approach that problem. Where am I wrong? And so sometimes I'll position advice and get them to attack my hypothesis, and they may go, "Oh, I like that. That's really good. Good. But here's what I'm thinking about. Here's where I might be wrong." But there's a way to get there. And sometimes people just tell me what I'll do. And I'll go, well, here's what I think, but I don't know what, tell me what I'm missing.
Yeah.
Tell me what I'm missing.
Yeah. That's super humble. And I like how you're talking, being an EO in the forum, I totally get it. We just added something, and not to hijack this, we just added something in our forum to have like a strategy hour, where it's like people present a business problem and like people chip in, and it's been like an advisory board in a way, like mixed with forum, but we do anyway, it's a whole nother story. But what I'm getting at is I think you kind of combining experience share and like in a very emotionally intelligent way, like invite someone into the thinking that you might have based on what you said, to then say, hey, okay, based on that, what should I do? And you then elaborate. So yeah, I'm learning a lot here, Dusty. I'm waiting for the invoice after the call. Tell me. This
is what I do for fun, man. This is why I started.
I'm just giving you a hard time. So let's talk about what you and I were going a little back and forth on before the call. You were telling me about execution problems, and they're often not, I think you said not often first order problems, but they're deeper than that. Are there second level problems, and like execution issues are much deeper than what you see on the surface? Can you unpack that? Because I think that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah. So think about it this way: we as leaders and as managers are trained to fix things. We're trained to see a gap, a problem, an execution gap, or whatever that is, and then we go and solve and create solutions. But I have this fundamental belief, like the execution awareness, the execution gap is a first level problem. We have a problem, we need to fix it. What I believe is if we actually need to look upstream, and this is actually, like a framework that, I've trademarked, like, because I believe it so passionately, we need to look upstream and go, where is there a clarity gap? Because if we have an execution problem, there is a clarity gap somewhere about what great looks like, what the goal was, how we were going to get there, blah, 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 blah. Or if there's perfect clarity, we then have an alignment gap. So if we have, as a leader or leadership team, we have perfect clarity on where we're going, but we don't get the results we want, we don't have alignment. We haven't aligned our resources. We haven't aligned our decisions. We haven't aligned our people. And so when you start peeling back this onion and you get to second level or third level, problem solving, you go, there's a clarity gap, or there's an alignment gap, or sometimes there's both. And that's what's driving this execution issue, because there's divergent effort. There's, misaligned resources, blah, blah, blah. And so when I'm working with a leader or leadership team, the first thing I'm going is like, what's the situation? Great. Now, where are you going? And the amount of times I ask somebody, what does tremendous success look like specifically in 12 months? And then they go, wow, that's a really good question. Oh, well, then how can you possibly expect your team to be aligned to an answer that you haven't even articulated yet? And so like there's a clarity gap. Or I have this, this, and this. Perfect. Why don't we get on the phone with a couple of your teammates and let's see if they can articulate the problem and the clarity of where we're going and how we're going to get there as well as you can. And then we find that there's a gap there. There's a 5-question framework, and I believe this is the CEO's like ability to execute. If they can ensure that every person in the organization can answer these 5 questions without them or a leader in the room, they will unlock incredible discretionary effort across their organization. And the questions are really simple. But question number 1, why are we here? What's our purpose beyond making money? And sometimes people look at me and go, why does that question matter? There's tons of research that shows that if people don't have an alignment to purpose of an organization beyond the money, beyond the paycheck, that they are willing and able to leave for a company that will, even if they make less money. And there's tons of data that supports that. Question number 2, what's our vision? This is like the idea of an understanding where we're going and what future looks like. That's the ability to articulate and cast that. And then question number 3 is, how are we going to get there? What's the plan? Getting an answer to those 3 questions at a fundamental level for the people beyond the leadership team is what sets up the most important question. I believe this is the keystone for unlocking discretionary effort in organizations. It's, where do I fit in? And the companies that do that well, and they give the front line or the midline or whatever level of the organization, when they can answer that question without the leader there, without the CEO in the room, what has happened is the person now knows how their work fits into the plan, how it fits into the vision, how it fits into the purpose. And the real value there, Brian, is they are closer to the customer, the problem, or the opportunity than anyone else in the organization. And they have the necessary information to make the optimal decision when they know where they fit in. And it sets up the 5th question, what's in it for me? And if they know what's in it for them, whether it's opportunity, and people typically look at me like, dog watching TV and go, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. That's all about money. And it's not about that at all. It can be opportunity, it can be growth, it can be, the ability to learn new things. But when a person can answer those 5 questions about their company, what they do is they shift from being mercenaries paid to do a job, and they shift into being missionaries bought into being part of something and evangelizing and executing and driving. And that's what unlocks discretionary effort. So it all starts with this idea that we have to understand that there's an execution gap and look for clarity so we can build alignment so the teams can execute. And that's what drives the results that we want.
Yeah, those 5 questions are pretty great. I mean, they remind me of like a town hall presentation of certain things that you move through. And it's ironic that, your 3rd question of like, what's the plan, comes after vision and purpose, and if I got the order right, it was vision.
You did. Purpose, vision, plan.
Purpose, vision, plan. And then, the downstream effects make so much sense from there. And I think, one of the things I'll build on is it's been, when you have, I think it takes, maybe you tell me if this confirms what you're sharing. As the leaders, if you have a clear vision for your company, you'll be able to make longer term decisions around people and situations because you know the North Star. So you're not cutting off things in the short term. But 2, I think what I'm hearing you say is when other people also understand that at a communication level, they know how to put in a disproportionate amount of effort because they want to feel ownership in driving that forward as well.
100%. And the other effect is, and this is what I hear from leaders all the time, why don't they make the decision? Why do they come to me? Why does everything end up on my plate? I'm the bottleneck. And if we empower them with the information and give them the data and the answers to these questions, then they'll make a better decision than you can because they have context. And I think it's just really, really powerful. But we often just get wrapped around this axle of the execution gap. And we go upstream and we look for clarity, and then we can build alignment.
For sure. I love it. I like it. I like it a lot. I feel like you've given this, not that you haven't with other things, but you've given that a lot of thought in how you're thinking about it. Dusty, one of the things as well to just take this a step forward is, we are moving into this world where workflows are being automated. We're moving into a world where you're not building an AI, you're not doing it right. We're moving into a world of there's going to be no more humans, and truth is there's going to be a mix of everything. But from your point of view, what does the rise of AI, the disruption that's happening, that's in front of us for the next decade plus, what is that going to require out of us as humans and leaders to lead, to do our work well, and lead organizations to new heights?
It's fascinating. And I've done a lot of work in agentic AI. There's generative, which is that call and respond. And, so many people treat AI as like an advanced Google. But when we step back, and I've been pretty deep in this stuff for the last 2 years, and I didn't even realize what I was doing. I was treating AI and AI tools as an employee. What are the skills and tools that you need to leverage to lead other humans? Well, it means you have to create clarity. It means you have to have a system of measure. It means that you have to have a coaching and training protocol. It means that you have to have a system of accountability. And so I think the leaders who double down on their core leadership skills of what makes them successful leading humans is going to be what unlocks the powers of agentic AI, because those are the same skills. Like when I build a new assistant, I'm training it just like I train an employee. I'm setting clear expectations. We have a charter or job description, blah, blah, blah. And as I've done a lot of research and talked to a lot of leaders, there's a huge amount of waste in the world with AI right now. I saw a stat earlier this week from MIT that said 95% of AI investments haven't created a positive ROI. I think the reason for that is people are grabbing tools without first defining what the problem is we need to solve and how are we going to solve it and how are we going to test and measure. That's a core leadership skill. Like, what is the bullseye? How will we know if we hit it? What are the shots we're going to fire to get on target and measure and repeat? And so my firm belief is those leaders who are good at leading people, if they can just shift their thinking to go, oh, I need to lead the people who lead the tools, lead the agents, lead the AI the same way. I need to get more clear. I need to get more focused. I think they're going to be incredibly successful, because what happens is people get into this world of like anti-AI. I was talking to a CEO friend of mine, one of my forum mates a few weeks ago, and he told me that people in his organization are signing emails now written by a human. And I kind of chuckled and I said, hey, why does that matter? Well, they want you to know that they did the work. And I said, but what's the important thing? Is the important thing that the work is right or that a person did it? Well, the important thing, of course, is that the work is right. And the human is the only one that can know whether the output is good. And if they could have the ChatGPT, Claude, whatever, write the thing and it's right, and they've gone back and forth and tuned and tweaked it and tested it, and they could proudly say, written by a machine, validated by an expert, then it's good content. So I was chewing on this. I was thinking it's kind of like Apple. If you look at the back of any Apple device, what does it say? It says designed in California. It has no bearing or meaning over where the device is built. It has everything to do with where it's designed. That's the banner statement. And so the leadership in an agentic AI world is led by a human, led by a thinker, led by an emotionally connected expert at information management. And so that's how I think about leadership in the world of AI. I think there's a intersection between the machine and the person, and the person's got to double down and leverage core leadership principles and skills that enable them to unlock what I think is the most important thing, the new opportunities that weren't capable or possible before AI. And I think that's where the real win's going to happen.
I love the design in California. Like that visually hits it home for me. And by the way, I'm very pro written by machine, designed by human, because like the human kind of, I mean, it's interesting. So I didn't quite know what you were talking about pre-call. I mean, I had an idea, but I think like a great leader, in my opinion, has a North Star of like where they want to go and how to get there. They're just architecting the machine to get them there faster. Who the hell cares who does it? I think is what you're saying.
It's exactly what I'm saying.
By the way, I'm very much on the same page as you on this. And so I think that let me ask you a question. The person you said that to, who said the team members are signing off written by human, and you replied back to him with what you just said. How was the response to that?
Well, the response was this really good conversation because he's an incredible leader. And we were talking about the stats in the data. There's some number, I'm going to call it 14% because I think that's right. 14% of leaders are on this advanced continuum of leveraging AI tools to create real value in their businesses. But 86% of people are hanging back because they're afraid. What is going to happen to my job? And so what is going to happen here? And so what we were talking about, what this transitioned into was, what is the change management need going to be inside of organizations to get the rest of the organization, the trailing 86%, to a place and a path where, designed by a human is the acceptable, in fact, the preferred, the only response. And so we started talking about the leadership change management necessary to remove fear, create clarity, build alignment, because people are afraid of their jobs, right? They're afraid they're going to be outsourced. Human's the only one that can make sure that the output's any good.
Yeah, I mean, I love your thinking, and I mean, look, what do you think? So to on this point, like, there's very clear examples where these tools need and should, I think, automate humans.
Oh, 100%.
And while like I think you can be very pro-human and be a good leader, it's also smart to be realistic and say, how do I upscale, or how do I make my organization more efficient? Like that's also a job of a leader. And so, my question to you is, what's the balance? Like, if you're working with an organization, deep down, like they could slash off tens of thousands of dollars in costs by deploying a few agentic systems. Like, as the coach or the leader guiding a group of leaders, like how do you manage that conversation? Because the power of your work is that you're helping people make decisions that could impact hundreds, if not thousands of people. But the power that isn't so good is that it's going to impact potentially hundreds and thousands of people. So when you're put in those situations and people are saying, Dusty, help me figure this out. Like how do you think about showing up in the context of those conversations?
Yeah, that's a deeply human question. And the way I think about it is this. Just like in every revolution and knowledge revolution, industrial revolution, whatever it is, the work will change. The jobs will change. And the leader's responsibility is to ensure that the organization is enduring. How do they need to do it? They need to be good financial stewards. And we need to look at this like three pillars on a stool. What is our return on invested capital? What is our return on invested time? And then what is our return on new opportunity capability? Like this thing that didn't exist before AI. So if there's hundreds of people in an organization who are doing manual work that could be to a degree of, reasonable quality, and 90%, like 100% outsourced to the machine. What's the same thing that happened when people were in fields farming behind the horse and the tractor was invented? There'll be new jobs. There will be new opportunities. So we have to do the right thing for the business, because maybe there's 100 people that will be impacted. What about the other 5,000? What about the other, all these other folks? We have to solve for that. And it can be a moral question. If we're not careful, though, we can make suboptimal long-term strategic decisions with a firm foot anchored in the past. And so I'll tee up those questions and go, what does this mean? How does it work? Like, where does the work go? And, there's this the old principle, and I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but like the idea that work expands to fit available space. When's the last time? Yeah, when's the last time you talked to somebody in a company and they didn't say they were busy? How are you doing? I'm busy. Okay, busy doing what? Is it work that matters? Is it work that creates value? Is it work that creates return on invested time? There's a lot of work that doesn't need to be done and should be done by someone else so that we can free up the uniquely human quotient to go do work that matters.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's someone who we brought into our organization. He's like, people will fill up the time you give them, and if you compress people's times, they will figure out how to get something done in the compressed amount of time.
100%, every day. So,
Dusty, you are a wisdom of knowledge. This has been incredible. We have barely talked. I guess last question. Tell us about, you have a pretty distinguished career leading and building businesses. You've transitioned to now leading other leaders as they build their businesses. Give us just a bit of background on what you're up to today, perhaps a little context and a skinny of what you're doing prior and where people can find you.
Yeah, I spent the first 28 years of my career leading organizations and teams. Last 15 of it was president or CEO of nine-figure businesses. And when I exited my last company a couple of years ago, I wanted to double down and lean into my passion, which is to ensure that leaders can grow themselves and their companies, and to do in a way that is meaningful and value-driven and purpose-driven. So that's why I started my company. And we're doing a lot of work now, doing this thing that we talked about here at the very end of, how are we leading in the world of agentic AI? And how are leaders getting clarity so they can lead their teams more effectively? So we've got, some resources. In fact, I'll send you a link, but, there's a resource I give to folks called My Rules of Engagement, where they can craft their own leadership rules of engagement and share with their teams so they and their teams can become more effective. I am passionate about creating clarity, building alignment so that teams can execute. And that's what we do. So I work, with teams one-on-one, or we do group work. But there's a lot of work right now in unlocking this leadership within the age of agentic AI. And if folks are interested in learning more, they can find me on LinkedIn, and I do a lot of thought leadership stuff and talk about this a lot on my podcast, Leadership Unlocked.
Awesome. Well, Dusty, this has been a joy. Always a rich, enduring conversation. You brought a lot of clarity and alignment to the topics today. Look forward to getting this out for you, and thank you for making the time on a holiday weekend.
Brian, this is amazing. You asked the best questions, so thank you for being so intuitive and digging past the surface.
Yeah, well, you gave me the raw materials that made it pretty easy. It says more about you than me. Talk soon.
Take care.